But Aaron Rodgers, you know what the story is today here in Minnesota? Because that's where I live right now. A-Rod is out. They have said publicly, apparently, that he's not going to sign. They're no longer into any kind of talks at all. And JJ's their guy. And you know, in all honesty, in all fairness to JJ, by the way, John, he's coming off an injury. So I think what the Vikings were thinking was, we need a veteran quarterback to bring in here that can be sort of that go-between and maybe some sort of somebody that could JJ could look up to, right? I mean, something in that category, because maybe he's not healthy enough. I think what they're telling us now is, well, he's probably healthy enough. We're going to get a backup quarterback, but it's not going to be Aaron Rodgers. And for maybe some of the right reasons. We talked about him being 41 years old. Sort of his attitude's not always been great, particularly his last year at Green Bay and probably the 2 years with the Jets. A lot of people didn't really like some of the things that he was doing, saying, throwing towels over his head, sitting by himself on the bench, not talking to people with the Jets. I mean, all of those things, I think, have to be looked at by the GM, have to be looked at by the head coach. Do we want to have this guy there? So the MVP is still looking for a spot, and I'm still going to say the same thing that I've been saying, John. I think he's going to go to Pittsburgh. I think he's going to have to sit down with the head coach and make sure that that's going to work out right for both of them. But they've got all the things that they need, John. So because of that, I think that one makes a lot of sense. So here's what I got for you. So under the circumstances of where we are now, I think Cleveland is going to actually potentially get Rodgers. And here's why. They don't got a quarterback. Cleveland's got nobody right now, right? But they do have two great receivers. So, you know, they're bragging that part of it up. And so, you know, they could get an edge rusher. If they signed Aaron Rodgers as quarterback, you know, they've got quarterbacks, I know, but is any of them really healthy enough to play this year? Probably not. Or good enough to play? Probably not if you want to make a run. So all of a sudden now, John, you know, you had a defensive end you just paid a boatload of money to. Well, he's at a certain age where it's only going to be a few years probably. And Abdul Carter's sitting right out there right now, the kid from Penn State. Why not grab him? So I think that's why I put Cleveland as possibility for a landing spot for Aaron. Giants, another spot where he could go, John. Malik Neighbors is a heck of a wide receiver. They got a pretty good coach who's had some failures. His failures might be because the quarterbacks they've been drafting, they've cut. None of those really high picks for the Giants are still there, right? And then lastly, you got Pittsburgh. They've got two great receivers. Obviously, you got Pickens and you've got Metcalf. Well, that's not so bad. So if you're Aaron Rodgers and I'm looking at this thing, I'm like, well, Cleveland doesn't sound that bad then, because what they've lacked is a quarterback. He thinks he's a great quarterback still. Why not go there? Because if he is a great quarterback, they got a hell of a defense, and they got a defense that's even better because of the draft. I really like these three, and it's kind of ironic where all of them are and what they play in, John, in terms of outdoor stadiums, all the rest. Although Cleveland's building a dome, but all the, you know, the weather features and everything else. I think it's pretty interesting. And who do you like best for Aaron to land with? Do you like Cleveland, the Giants, or Pittsburgh?
Pittsburgh, no doubt.
Yeah.
And the head coach knows how to handle head cases. He doesn't deal with them. So if Aaron sits down there and he tries to dictate something, Pete, he gone.
Yep.
They'll take somebody else. But if he's smart, and you said, they've got two great wide receivers.
Yes.
That's got to be tempting as hell for him versus the Giants or Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
And quite frankly, Cleveland, it's where a lot of players go to, you know, end their careers, because you never hear of them again. Unless they go 12-0, you know, on their way to the playoffs, you're never going to be talking about Cleveland, except about, of course, Myles Garrett.
Yeah.
So I would say Pittsburgh is the best shot for him, Pete. If he went to Pittsburgh and he's in great shape, which I think he will be, and he's in good with the coach, he could have 7 touchdowns in the first 6 games with Metcalf. Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me. And like you pointed out yesterday, Pete, he had 28 touchdowns and only 11 picks?
Yep.
I mean, you know, that's the upper quartile of the NFL. Mm-hmm. So I think that's not lost on Tomlin over with the Pittsburgh Steelers, that's the guy that could deliver the ball to those two guys.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next up we got March Madness, John. A little different than everybody's thinking I'm going. I'm not going to basketball. I'm going March Madness NFL. So we've gotten through the combines. We're getting through free agency. We've got pro days everywhere. As a matter of fact, in my backyard, John, University of Minnesota, they got a pro day going on today. So you've got a lot of kids that are not just Golden Gophers. I'm talking about athletes from nearby that they're bringing up here, and they're going to use our facilities as the combine. I think it's going to be very, very interesting, and I think the madness continues, and we are seeing these free agent markets, and some of the signings, John, have been some of them shocking, not all of them, but some of them very shocking, and probably a lot of people still shocked about the fact that Aaron Rodgers is still floating around out there. I mean, so that gives you a little bit of idea of why I called it March Madness. But I got some dark horses for you, John, and we can decide what we think of it. But I got 4 players that I think go higher in the draft than most everybody else would ever guess because they've never heard of them, and half of them probably don't know these schools at all. Gray Zabel, North Dakota State. You got Charles Grant, William and Mary, big and lean. Marcus Ware, Montana State, and Jackson Slater from Sacramento State, a stadium where I used to play football when I played for the Surge. So here's the one thing they all have in common. They're all offensive linemen. They're all guys who could play tackle, guard, or center. And all 4 of them, I'll tell you what, I think these guys are worth a lot more than some of these other GMs. So I think that there's a lot of ways where you could really manipulate yourself around in the draft to get some of these players from the FCS schools that a lot of guys just forget about. They don't do it. I mean, who has some of the best tight ends in all the NFL? South Dakota State. I mean, it's amazing. You want a quarterback? Well, believe it or not, a couple of them have come out of North Dakota State. We've had some Montana State. We had a great quarterback up there this year. I mean, John, to be honest with you, there are players in that level that are easily as good, if not better, than a lot of the other players, and it's because they started out as athletes and they ate themselves in a good way into positions like a big tight end, a guy who might have been a wide receiver, a tight end who's now an offensive lineman. These guys are athletic on top of being big or whatever. So I think there's a lot of guys out there that would be some great dark horses. You got anybody at all that you want to throw out there?
Well, you named several of the North Dakota types, Pete, but I got one from Central Arkansas.
Oh, no.
And I'm not positive, since I already mentioned Pippen. I think Pippen might have played there, Pete, basketball, of course, not football. But there's a guy named Tamarian Wilson, who's a safety from Central Arkansas. The kid's 6'2", 215, and keep in mind, that is a big safety, folks.
Nice big
so in other words, this kid's a hitter. Is he like a Ronnie Lott type? My answer is yes. If you get a chance, pull up some film of him because you probably didn't see him play last year on Saturdays, but the kid is a hitter. And you've got teams like, for instance, the Eagles that need to go restock their defensive backfield. Are you going to replace Cooper? No, but this kid can play. So I'd say, Pete, this kid, good speed, great size, because if you're 6'2", pro measured, means you're pretty much 6'3".
Yeah,
and if you're 6'15", means you probably play at 220 something.
Yeah.
That's a linebacker that can run, that is going to light some people up. So watch for this guy, Tamarian Wilson. He might go as high as the 3rd round, Pete. And whoever steals this guy, I think is going to be happy they got him.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, John. And I think that some of the talent levels are exceeding a lot of the big name schools. And these guys developed later, and they probably played less games. They're probably less beat up. A lot of different things that I think make positives out of a lot of these FCS guys. And I think there's a whole slew of them, and there's some of them are going to be running 40s right now over at the University of Minnesota. I promise you that. Kids from South Dakota, North Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin, whatever, if they're nearby, they're going to be coming there. And your old schools of, you've got St. Thomas. They got great football. They're D1 these days. All they do is win. St. John's University, they put in at least one guy a year into the NFL. it's amazing how many kids are out there that aren't at the University of Minnesota or Michigan or Ohio State or whatever, LSU, name your school. There's a lot of those smaller schools that have some great players.
Absolutely. Well, and we're going to give you a bet too, folks. Pete talked about a player from St. Mary's, and I'm going to say take St. Mary's versus American. They're getting 2.5 points. That's basketball, folks.
Yep.
So check that one out. I think that's a good bet for tonight, Pete.
I like it. I like that one a lot, John. Especially, St. Mary's is one of those schools that the only time of year that you ever think about them really is around this time of year, because they play some basketball. They've consistently been a basketball school that everybody doesn't know until March rolls around and they're like, yeah, that St. Mary's is pretty damn good. So I'm with you on that.